and welcome everyone once again. We are so happy to be with you today after 2 weeks. And as usual, I also, oops, what happened with my video? Johan, did you stop? Oh, okay, now it's back. It showed me, co-host stopped your video. So
yeah, so sorry. I was about to let somebody in, but then when I pushed, they were already let in. So then I pushed the video off button on you. That's not mine. That was my mistake. Sorry.
I didn't even know it was possible, but anyway. Okay, so I will remind ourselves of our agreements and principles. The first one is confidentiality, which means that we keep our experience, our learnings, but we leave who said what in this room. We speak with intention, noting what is relevant to be shared in the conversation in this moment. And we listen with attention, with an open mind, open heart, open will, respectful of the learning process for all members of the group. As for feedback, we are not here to fix anything or to give advice. So as much as possible, we invite you to share from the I perspective by saying, I feel, I see, I sense, and then what wants to be shared in the space. And silence is part of the conversation. So there's no expectation or obligation to speak. If you feel contemplated by what all others have shared before you, you can remain in silence because your presence is already a gift to the group. And also, silence helps us stay grounded in the present moment. So if in any moment you feel that we can benefit from silence, each one of us can ask for a pause just to be more present. Yes. And with that, Yuan, can you help us be more grounded?
Sure, I will do that. So independently on the part of the day and independently of what we're coming from, maybe some of you already might feel grounded and some of you are just rushing into this meeting from something else. But just to let us get into this meeting, join me in a brief grounding exercise. So if you feel comfortable, just take a deep breath, and as you breathe out, you can close your eyes or maybe gaze just right in front of you on the desk or on the floor or whatever you have in front of you. And shift your attention to your breathing. You don't have to do anything about it, but just shift your attention to your breathing. And now let's shift your attention to your right foot. You don't have to change anything. Just pay attention to your right foot. And then slowly move your attention up through your leg, your lower part of the leg, over the knee, and the thigh. And then shift your attention over to your left foot. How is your left foot doing? To the lower part of your left leg, to your knee, and to your thigh. I assume you're sitting down, so shift your attention to the connection between your body and the chair you're sitting on. And then slowly move it up your spine, along your back. to your neck and up onto your skull. Again, just pay attention and let it be as it is. And then back down into your belly. So shift your attention to your belly. Notice any movement. Slowly move it up to your chest. To your shoulders. And then out into your right arm. Slowly move your attention through your right arm. All the way out to the hand and your fingers. Now shift your attention to your left arm, starting in the shoulder. And then moving it slowly through the arm out into your left hand. Then see if you can take in your whole body to the whole body. Shift your attention to your whole body and see what you're noticing. And then ask yourself, what brought you here to this session? Why are you here? And what is your intention with this session? In your eyes and take eye contact with the rest of us here on the screen. And if you haven't had your camera on, you can turn it on now. And just take in, we are 41 people connecting from all over the globe with this shared purpose of advocating for inner development, for outer impact. And we have all our different perspectives in on how we want to contribute with this. And together we can become stronger. And with that, I welcome you all back to this session.
Thank you, Yuan. We are going now in breakout rooms. I'm posting the question in the chat. And you'll be placed in triads. You have 15 minutes to discuss what challenges and questions do you have related to advocating for inner development for outer change. So 15 minutes to meet other colleagues and build this community. Do you have any questions before we send you in breakout rooms? No? Ready? Okay. Right. Welcome back, everyone. We would love to hear a few voices. Did you find any commonalities in your group? I see some people nodding. Who wants to share? You want to share, Cheryl? I saw you doing like this.
Okay, if you are patient with my English because I'm not native. Yeah, I think that we all three, Elizabeth and Roland, were my partners in this group. And I think that one of the challenge that we are facing is how to work in our inner selves to be better in making questions and invite people to reflect in terms of how to start working in their inner development. In my case, I also mentioned that I live in Peru, in a third world country, and the level of education is still very low, and people not necessarily have understanding of what abilities or competencies are, or what is for them to be working on their personal development instead of seeing outside and not taking part with or the responsibility to be part of the change that we need, especially in countries like mine. I don't know if Elizabeth and Roland would like to add to complement what I said. Thank you.
No, I think you said it right. Yeah, I don't really have. Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge Sharon because I mean, many of us who live in first world, quote unquote, nations, where the economy is more developed, there are more opportunities. And, for people in Latin America and other, countries where the economy is not as developed, it's such a struggle. But, your commitment, Sharon, to serving the people that you want to serve is so palpable and inspiring. It really inspires me.
So I think one question to ask is, what is development? Because coming from Brazil and having been in many different countries and spent long periods in other countries in the global north, yes, in terms of infrastructure, I see there is more infrastructure and in those countries and so on. But when we talk about the disconnect that Otto Scharmer often mentions, if you are familiar with the theory U, he always mentions the disconnect from self, disconnect from others, disconnect from nature. I see that the disconnect from others, at least in Brazil, in my country, I think we are more connected than what I experience in Europe, more supportive, like living as a community, supporting family, friends, and not as individualistic. So yeah, there are types of development, but other developments, if you think of social skills, I guess we are quite developed in this sense. So yeah, but I understood what you meant.
Thank you. I live in Brazil for 2 years, so I know what you're saying.
Yeah, and I believe Peru is probably similar Latin countries.
Yes. But you guys are special.
Thank you. Who else wants to share?
So what are the challenges that you're facing when advocating for the development for outer impact? What are the things that you brought up? It's a big question, but I'd be curious to hear a bit about the things that you're facing. Of course, you can share it in the chat, but it's nice to hear everybody's or some voices in this bigger room also. So anyone?
Yes, I have a question maybe.
Mhm.
As we talked about the link between inner development and outer change. So I was wondering if, speaking about outer change, we're only talking about the SDGs, or that there are others outer change we could want to see achieved. The SDGs are also a specific map for specific actors with a specific view. And for example, if I consider that raising empathy in everyone is a development in itself, should it be linked to the SDGs?
That's a great question, Damien. From my point of view, I think the SDGs, there's 17 of them. So there's such a broad definition of sustainable development, if you will. So they include a lot of dimensions. And I think that's one of the powers of it, that they don't just single out just climate change or poverty or so forth, but they take all those dimensions. So I think they are important in that sense. but then we also know that they're for 2030 and we're really closing in on them. So I would view them as defining what is sustainable development, what is the impact we want to see out there. And we need to view beyond them now, actually thinking beyond them. But to your point, one way of looking at it, I'm agreeing with what you're saying. I believe that if there's more empathy in general, we will contribute to a better world. But in a way, if you will, empathy could be the inner development, part of the inner development that would help us act out in the world for a more flourishing future, if you will. So it's the connection, I believe, an important to me connection between the IDGs and any other work with inner development, if you will, is the connectedness to the future that we want to see. So everything we do is to change things in the world out there. It's not just for our own sake. So that's, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Damien? Damien, yeah, all right, thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so let's hear maybe another voice. Yeah, Darren.
Well, one thing that's been on my mind as a challenge or concern is, I mean, we live in a very divisive world right now, politically for sure. And this is obviously it's a really stark division right now in North America. How do we, as we go and advocate for inner development, how does this not sort of turn into a left versus right thing? And optically, or how do we make this a tent that everyone sees as value and not someone trying to convert somebody else? It's just a practical thing that's gnawing away at me, I guess, as I think of my way forward on advocating for inner development.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, Darren? What's your current thinking on that very difficult topic?
I just have it's not something I've thought my way through clear on, other than it's just I perceive it as a challenge that I'm going to have as I go out and speak to people about a lot of these inner skills in the world that we sort of are living in right now.
Johan,
but I think a lot of people have thoughts on that, because we had a little bit of a micro macro discussion in our breakout group. So there's different ways to view this issue, I think.
Johan,
I would like to add my 2 cents on this. I think, if anything, that this is what can, how do I frame this? In the sense that I think talking about inner development brings people down to the human level. And that's the furthest from political ideals, because you're seeing individuals as who they are, as a human, rather than all the labels that societies put on them or they put on themselves. And the idea of advocacy is also interesting, because this is also very subjective, in the sense that I don't see this as I've got it all and I'm here now to educate you, but more so is that, hey, I found something that's pretty good, and because it benefited me, that I would like to share with you because I think you might like it. I have a gift and I would like to share. And whether if you take it or not, that's entirely up to the individual. And them not liking that doesn't say anything about you. And also, like, it also may not say anything about them. It's just about who they are at that moment. And also, if anything, about your gift giving abilities. So if you really want to share this gift, then it's more about, like how you are presenting this gift, rather than like, this is great, I've got it all. And if you're not getting it, then you're not one of us. So that's my 2 cents.
You're nodding there, and it resonates with me. Tanya.
Yeah, I had my group was with Darren and Theodora, so I'm gonna be vulnerable and share my example that I used in our discussion. So I'm gonna use the example. My work is in advocacy as well, and I think that what Darren was talking about is that divide is really, really important, because a lot of times when we have a divide, we see things as one way as being good and the other way of being bad. One is right, one is wrong. One is healthy, one is unhealthy, right? And there's a healthy way to live and there's an unhealthy way to live. As a person with a disability who's dependent on a lot of medical care, I often am put in the unhealthy category. And with that unhealthy category, I'm required to live with a lot of medical technology. Medical technology that is not necessarily in the best interest of a sustainable environment, but it's dependent on my life to live. So while there's a lot of negative things that we can talk about inventions, the medical technology that we have invented has made my life possible. So I live with plastic appliances on my body every day, all day. If it wasn't for glue and plastic and tape, I wouldn't be here right now. I'm the binary. I'm in the middle. It's messy. It's gray. So it's not one is right or one is wrong. It's about how do we invite these conversations without someone like me walking away as being, I'm bad. I don't have a way to live without producing some type of garbage for Mother Earth. I'm not bad. I am well. I am healthy, but I still need all of these things, because we don't want me living. I can't live without these incredible inventions that I'm grateful for, and my children are like, that have made all of my life possible. So it's not, as Darren was saying, and we were talking, I'm the micro perspective. I'm the story. So we need to connect people with the story to feel empowered that, yes, you have these things, you live with these things, but there's still a whole world of inner development and sustainability and a bridge that we can create. But while we're lifting everyone up, continuing to rise, rather than kind of making them feel like, oh, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I don't fit the model.
Thank you for sharing that, Tanya. Rafaela,
Yes, Hannah, I would like to check if you can hold your question for now as you have the hand up, because we have Thomas with us. He's our guest today, and he only has until 6, like, so only 20 minutes with us. So we can go back to it after he shares.
Yeah, sorry, Rafaela, I just want to acknowledge, I want to really say thank you, Tanya, for being vulnerable and opening up and recognizing that the world is in us, each and every one of us, the polarities in each and every one of us. We are part of this society, so we're both contributing to the status quo, but also enabling the change. And I am, as you, dependent on things that are not sustainable in a way, and there are parts that I can choose. So I thank you for sharing that, Tanya, and then also setting the standard for being open in this way. Sorry, Rafael, I just wanted to say that.
Yes, so we have Tomas Björkman with us, who will share a little bit about why inner development is important. He's a social entrepreneur based in Europe, and driven by this deep curiosity we are discussing here, of what are the hidden structures that shape the world. So Thomas, I'll give you the word because we know you have a limited time. Well, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me and having me as a guest speaker, giving a bit of input. I've been with the IDG project from the very beginning, or even before the very beginning, as one of the initiators of the project, but more about that in a second. I should also say that it's been interesting to listen into the conversation here, and that both this question about the IDGs aiming to transformation beyond the SDGs is something that I will mention something about, and also this transcending the left-right spectrum. I will also say something about that, or I could even start by saying something about that, and that is that when we created the framework, we specifically focused on capacities just because of this. We could have focused on values or narratives, but they are much more politically sensitive. As long as you're just helping people to build capacities and then leaving everyone to form their own worldview once those capacities has been obtained, you are helping people to gain more freedom. Then, of course, in our theory of change, we know that if you help people build capacity, for example, for compassion and perspective taking, that will, of course, also have an impact on their values. So let me see if I can share my screen here.
And as you're doing that, Thomas, just to clarify that Thomas is the founder of the Oak Tree Foundation, which is actually, that's where everything started with this IDG movement. So
yes, I will show one or two slides on that as well. So let's see if this is. Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So here you see a little bit about my background. I've been a serial entrepreneur and investment banker for more than 25 years. But 15 years ago, I decided to set up the Oak Island Foundation, focusing on the connection between interpersonal development and growth and societal change. I live in London, have set up an institute here called Perspectiva, and yeah, that's about me. This is the Oak Island, or Ekskäret, as we say in Swedish. This is the anchor point of the Oak Island Foundation, and it all started with youth camps, creating a summer experience for adolescents in the age of 14 to 16 years. And even if we didn't have that language 15 years ago when we started these camps, you could call it IDG youth camps. We are really trying to help our participants to develop in all 5 IDG dimensions. And on top of that, give a safe place to start asking the more fundamental and existential questions about life and our purpose and why we are here from a completely non-confessional base. The rest of the year, we do adult developmental retreats. We do some IDG ambassador training on the island, and we have invitational conferences. And during some of these invitational conferences that we were running from 10 years ago or something, we gathered. Sorry, I should have mentioned that I'm also written these 3 books. I was not aware that this slide was here. But here we are back at the Oak Island. We have gathered some of the leading thinkers, I would say even in the world, on adult development and how important it is for us to continue our inner development throughout life. Again, not just for our own benefit, certainly for our own benefit and the benefit of the projects we are running, but ultimately and most importantly for the benefit of society and eventually for the planet. And here you can see in this picture from 7 years ago, you can see some of the leading thinkers in this world. You can see Bob Keegan over here, Susan Cook-Reuter, Bonita Roy, Thomas Jordan, Christian Stolden, and a few others, gathering around the question. And it is Jan Henriksson, our first general director of the IDGs, who has written this sign here: what is the value of development? And that was one of the starting points. And then we come to the question, how can we explain inner development for a larger audience? And that brings us to the concept and the framework of the IDGs that came out of this process, and it came out some 5 years ago, as you know. And I think the IDGs are an answer to the question, how can we get more people to understand what inner development is actually about and why it is important? And I sometimes say that I see the framework, which is just a bit of the IDG movement. I mean, the IDG movement is really about the broader narrative around inner development, but the framework is a good starting point. And I see the framework a little bit like a tourist map. So, as I said, I live in London, and when I have friends visiting London for the first time, I do not give them a taxi driver's map of London, even if all the streets are named there and everything. I mean, you just get confused with the taxi driver's map. I give my friends visiting London for the first time a tourist map, pointing out the major areas of London and the main attractions. And that's how I see the inner development goals framework. It is a beginner's map to inner development. And of course, it's a bit arbitrary with these 5 dimensions and 5 skills for each of them. But it is helpful, and it does make people understand. And I would even dare to say that it is the best tourist map of inner development that is around. There are other tourist maps as well, but I would say that this is probably the best tourist map that is around. And at least it has taken me and Jan Henriksson to some very interesting places that have showed interest. And here we are at the White House in Washington under the Biden administration, giving a presentation on the IDGs to 18 of US agencies and departments that were interested in implementing the IDGs in the US administration. And on the other side of the spectrum, it has also taken, and one outcome of that was the US Climate Literacy Guide, that now also include the transformative skills and the IDG approach, saying that to be literate about the climate change, you do not only need to look at the outer world, you also need to look at the inner world. And if the White House and the US administration was one extreme point, then the other one I would say would be the Vatican. So the Vatican has shown interest for the IDGs as a tool to explain the importance of the inner world, and specifically they have published a guide to Pope Francis' environmental teaching, where they have used the IDG dimensions and going through each dimension. What do the IDGs says about being, thinking, relating, etc., and what did Pope Francis have to say about the environment in these dimensions? More curiosity, but I think it's quite an accomplishment from the IDG side to have had this broad recognition, I would say. So as a tourist map, it has certainly got something to give, just the framework. But then going back to this connection between the IDGs and the SDGs, and again, formulating it that way, the IDGs for the SDGs, it's quite catchy. The SDGs is something that the world has agreed upon and is important. But for me, the value of the IDGs are deeper than just the SDGs, even if the SDGs are very broad. And to speak about that a little bit, I would want to start by saying that the world is going through a number of crises right now. I mean, there is nobody that does not recognize that we have all these tremendous challenges facing humanity, and that some people are talking about this as giving the name polycrisis of the situation right now, indicating by that these many different crises are interconnected and interdependent, and that's of course correct and very important to notice. Some thinkers or thought leaders are even introducing the word permacrisis, indicating that we might have entered a situation in our civilization where we have to live with crises. There is no way that they will go away. But I prefer to talk about meta-crisis. And by meta-crisis, we indicate that these crises are not just interconnected and interdependent. By stressing the meta-crisis, we put an emphasis on the fact that these crises might have underlying deeper causes, and that the crises that we usually see, like the environmental crisis and the political democratic breakdown and the psychological ill health and all of this, might just be symptoms of a deeper underlying crisis. And one way of looking at these deeper underlying sources could be to say that we have in modernity exhausted our present capacity, both individually and collectively, to understand and acting in the world. Meaning that at the fundamental level, these crises are a crisis in capacity, in human capacity, individual and collective. There are many organizations and thinkers coming to this conclusion, and one way of saying this is to say that the increase in complexity of our outer world has to be matched by an increase in psychological resources in our inner worlds. And one particular organization, the Center for Humane Technology, and that is Tristan Harris' organization, the organization that did the documentary called The Social Dilemma of the problems and implications of the digital technology of our inner lives. They are talking about the increasing complexity of issues compared to the decreasing capacity to respond. And they call that the wisdom gap. So, with this wisdom gap and with this incapacity to respond individually and collectively, the present worldview, the present paradigm that we are living in, I believe, is coming to an end. And that this meta-crisis that we can see is the sign of a paradigm shift taking place. And what do we mean by a paradigm shift, and how do they happen? Well, this is a model called the Berkana model of the Berkana Institute in the USA, that is Margaret Wheatley's and Joanna Macy's institute. And I think this is a good way of understanding what is happening and our role. And if we look at these paradigm shifts, the last time we had in the West, we had a fundamental paradigm shift, that was during the Enlightenment, when we went from an old paradigm, which was the medieval paradigm of a dogmatic religious worldview that probably had its peak in the 1300s. And then technological development happened. Many different technologies came online, but perhaps the printing press might have been one of the most disrupting technologies. And the whole of Europe went into a period of chaos. And that started with the French Revolution, and it continued with the Napoleonic Wars. And for about 50 years, Europe was in chaos and turbulence. But then out of that, something new was born. Not only a new way of relating to knowledge and understanding, but also a new way of organizing ourselves and to organize society. And what was born then, the new paradigm, is what we today call modernity. And it's important to remember that these paradigm shifts, they can go two ways. And I sometimes like to look at the civilizational shifts like this from a adaptive systems perspective. And we know from adaptive systems, whether they are physical systems or biological systems or societal systems, that they can only adapt incrementally up to a certain point. Every complex adaptive system reaches a point where that is not any longer possible. You reach the limitations of that old way of organizing a system. And when you come to that point, you either have a step up in complexity or you have a breakdown in the complexity of the system. And of course, when we are talking about a step up in complexity, that sounds like everything will look more complicated, but a more complex way of organizing can also be a more beautiful way, a more simplistic way of organizing. So an example of that from biology could be that a flower is a much more complex way of organizing matter than a stone, but it's also more elegant and beautiful. So we should remember that this step up in complexity into a new paradigm is not automatic. So what are we seeing right now then? Well, if we are in a paradigm shift again, then of course the I'm stuck here. I don't know why that's happening. Now it's working again. So if we are now in a shift again, what could that look like? And what would it mean to be in a fundamental shift of worldview? Well, if we look at the old paradigm shift from an old religious dogmatic worldview into the modern worldview, like this boy standing here, he might be standing in Times Square or something, surrounded by the present symbolic world and a modern way of making sense of the world. He is then looking back at the medieval way of making sense of the world, and he doesn't understand anything. But we should remember, that, of course, that medieval way of making the world understandable had a function and was functional and helped that world for 1,000 years to be kept together. And again, when we are criticizing the modernity, and we can see how modernity leads to both environmental degradation and social and psychological illness, we shouldn't forget that this paradigm has kept the world together for 200 years and has given us things like modern medicine, democracy, and human rights that we wouldn't be without. But I still think that if we in 200 years would look back to our present world, I hope that our present world will be equally non-understandable to the future observer, just as inunderstandable as our medieval world is to us today. So that is how deep the shift I believe that we are in. So if we look at a little bit more on this shift today again, So then, of course, now the old paradigm is the modernity, which had its peak, at least up in the Northern Europe, perhaps in the 60s, 70s, early 80s or something. And then again, a lot of technological development happened. Internet and artificial intelligence are, of course, perhaps the two most obvious examples, but many other examples as well. And that this technological development has really then made the old paradigm exhaust itself. And we can see how we are now entering into a time of turbulence again. And the big question then becomes for me, what might be born from this? Will we have a positive emergence of something? And what would then that something look like? That again might be so completely different from what we are experiencing today when we are navigating our modern world. And when I started writing about this 15 years ago, I thought that I might not live to see this bifurcation point of the present civilization. But I think that we are very close to that now, or if we have not already entered into that chaos. And if we look at the different scenarios that we are facing, I could say that probably on the downside, we certainly have the possibility of entering into a chaos in the world, a chaos that deep that global supply chain will break down, and we might enter into a new medieval world where no single country on the planet could produce an iPhone or a smartphone or a computer, and the internet breaks down, and we go into a very violent period that could last for a couple of 100 years. I think this is possible. Luckily, I don't think this is the most likely scenario. Unfortunately, I think the most likely scenario is a scenario of oppression, either political oppression or some sort of feudal technological oppression, so that when we are starting to go into this chaos, there will be so much political pressure for control that we can't resist that, and we end up in a situation like that. But the interesting question for me is, would there be, in the language of Daniel Schmachtenberger, a third attractor for the system? So in systems theory, you're talking about different attractors that are possible outcomes from future outcomes from the system. And what would that look like? And again, one thing that is for sure, and that is that this will be a turbulent time, and that what will come out of this will be emergent. So when we're talking about emergence, that means that it's not just difficult to see what an outcome of a system shift like this could be like. It is actually theoretically impossible to see through an emergent event. And just considering the rapid technological development that we are going through right now, I mean, we can't say at all what the world will look like in 20 years, not even 10 years. Perhaps not with the speed of AI right now. We can't even say what the world will look like in 5 years. So when we have this amount of uncertainty, it becomes so important that we as individuals are actually able to hold that uncertainty and be able to act under that uncertainty, and not just demand certainty from external authorities like an authoritarian political leader, but that we actually accept responsibility and that we can be positive agents in this process of emergence. And here is where we come back to the IDGs, because system science tells us that even if we can't manage this process, and even if we cannot see through this process, we can increase the odds of a positive emergence rather than a breakdown. And one of the most important things to do in order to increase that is to increase the capacities of the components of the system. And of course, in this case, the components of the system are us humans. So by increasing these capacities that we call the IDGs, we are actually substantially increasing the odds for humanity to have a positive outcome of this civilizational shift compared to if we do not have these capacities. And in that, it's important to understand that this is true both for our leaders, political leaders, industrial leaders, but it's also true for the population in general. Because if democracy is to survive in a process like this, which I hope, perhaps not exactly in the form we have today, but in some sort of updated version, then of course having these capacities is not just a question for a small elite, but a substantial part of the population needs to increase these capacities in order to have this positive emergence. So, as we can't plan our way through the emergence, it's important that we still are able to act. And that's why acting is such an important dimension in the IDGs. And to be able to act under uncertainty and to experiment. Because you cannot see through a complex dynamic system. In order to get information about the system, you need to act in the system. So sometimes I'm talking about the need for us to dare to build bridges into the fog. Even if we don't know what's there on the other side, we need to try, we need to fail, we need to try again. So a lot of initiatives informed by the capacities of the IDGs is one of the things that are necessary for us to break through. It's not the only thing, but it's certainly one necessary thing. And I just want to stop by showing a picture from one of these projects of bridges into the fog that I'm involved with right now. And I'm actually sitting here in Stockholm by a lake, and we have a co-living initiative here for about 50 people, where we are actually together trying to live the IDGs. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing this one.
So I'm open for a few questions. I got to dash to a dinner here in Stockholm, so I'm sorry about that, but a few questions.
Tim, you have a question. Yeah.
Yeah, there are two things on my mind hearing you speak. One is leverage points. It's related in a way to the whole challenge of speaking to the converted and what's been talked about earlier. Darren mentioned it, how to bridge divides, and you talked, Thomas, about bridging. While we are gathered here, and while you, Thomas, are gathered there in Stockholm doing the good work, at the same time, there's a huge effort or efforts that are going in other directions. And one of my questions for myself, for you, for all of us, is how do we actually get leverage points on some of the power dynamics that are happening around the planet? What part of humanity is most forceful in directing the direction of the historical evolution, and how can we have some impact on some of those points of power, so to speak, power in the sense of what actually impacts the path that we go on. And then the other and related question is, while we speak and while we make our efforts at acting, and this is very related, we have the impending chaos that seems to be presenting itself in terms of climate change at a level that we have not yet experienced, and that is maybe hard for us to imagine. So those are the two things on my mind as I hear you speak.
Yes, and they are of course related, and they put us in a bit of a dilemma, because to really grapple with these things, I believe that we need, as I said, build capacities at broad scale in society, and until we have those capacities in society, a demagogue suggesting simple solutions to complex problems will always be appealing to many people. And until we build the inner capacities to actually hold this turbulence and complexity, we will have psychological defenses like denial that will help us as individuals not feel the pressure of the world and just deny these things. And to build these resources, it will take time. It might even take generations. And as you point out, we don't have the generational time. We have urgency. And I don't know how one could combine the urgency with a deep wish from my side to maintain democracy in some form and not go for the oppression and saying, well, the people are so stupid and cannot believe what is best for the planet and for ourselves. So let's dictate some climate solutions here now from the top. I think this is a true dilemma, and I don't have an answer. I just want to point at Lena Anderson's and my book, The Nordic Secret, where we are talking about how inner development supported on large scales, and then we talk about programs, 6 months programs that were made available free of charge to something like 10% of each new generation in Sweden during a 50-year period, that really shifted the consciousness level, with perhaps not a majority, but a significant enough portion of the society. We talk about 20% or something in society, and in many layers of society, not just decision makers, but also on the factory floors, and how that had a decisive input on building the strong democratic traditions that are still alive in Scandinavia right now, even if we are starting to lose it, and we have certainly in the political discourse lost every sense of any understanding of consciousness development and inner development in the open public discourse today, which was not the case 100 years ago. 100 years ago, that was on all intellectuals and politicians' mind, that inner development needed to happen alongside with democracy. Otherwise, democracy would be dead. So sorry for not having a blueprint. Darren, you're next.
Well, thank you. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to pose a question to a deep thinker like Tomas, and of course, yeah, The World We Create and The Nordic Secret are really must-reads to be kind of gaining any sort of understanding about today's transition.
Thank you.
Maybe I'm trying to come up with the useful question. I mean, I like that you kind of sort of touched on The Nordic Secret, which you also talk about in The World We Create. But maybe to press a bit further is, what do you sort of feel are the 21st century versions of the folk school concept that, you know, I mean, it's interesting to see how it traveled from Germany to the Nordic countries and to the US. It helped spark the civil rights movement. I mean, this is an amazing case example but of course it's not a blueprint. But I'm curious what are those experiments, those versions of the folk school today that can really have that transformative effect that the folk schools did in the Nordic context? It's an interesting question. I know there's no blueprint, but what are some of those experiments that are coming to mind to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So I think that there is nothing more developmental than people meeting at physical meetings of sorts, and also living together. And that is what you did at the folk schools. You lived together in a small community together with your teachers, often out in nature, in groups of perhaps 40, 50, 60 people. And that's, of course, what we're trying to do at Lakefront, living together. I mean, it's not a folk school, it's a co-live, but trying to create a deliberately developmental culture. So I think physical meetings are very important in the development. But having said that, of course, creating those environments are expensive, and going out to Ekfärret Island for a retreat is, of course, something that can only be available for a limited number of people. So I actually think that we can use technology to help scale in the development. And one small scale such experiment we have done together with the Norrsken Foundation here in Sweden, where we have developed a non-profit open source digital platform for inner growth and development called 29K or Aware. You can search for Aware on App Store and download that free of charge. So scaling digitally, I think, could be one way of doing it. Another, and perhaps a bit controversial, and I have a very divided relationship to the new technology. I mean, I know the challenges that new technology is bringing online, but also looking historically, technology has helped us a lot to reach the place where we are today, and we wouldn't want to be without medical technology, for example, of course. So AI, and if the developers of AI could have an understanding of inner development, and in particular this what something is called vertical development, and make sure that in our interactions with AI, that the AI is not just meeting us where we are, which the AI is already trying to do. I mean, and doing that in a very good way, understanding where the person it is interacting with, where that person comes from, and try to give answers and a dialogue on that level. But not just staying there at meeting people, but consciously trying to expand that person's horizon, possibility to take more perspectives, to think in systems thinking, and poking the compassion point a little bit as well. I think AI could become a developmental tool. But again, it depends on how we treat these things. Some people had great hopes for social media, and then we gave social media to the market, and the market pulled social media in a completely different direction. It did not create an understanding over the world between different people. And of course, AI can go in exactly the opposite direction if we just leave it with the market forces. So, yeah, there we are. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. I really appreciate that you took your time to stay a bit longer on this very big subject, so we could at least have some questions to you and digest a bit of your message, which of course gives us a very valuable view on the context that we're all trying to figure out on how to navigate for a better future for everyone going forward.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so let's follow a tradition here and just turn on our mics and just say thank you to Thomas in our native language so we get this sense of the globe in the room. So let's go.
Obrigada.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thomas.
Thank
you,
you.
Thomas.
Thank you.
Obrigada.
Fantastic.
Ciao.
Thank you all, and thank you for inviting me. And not the least, thank you for all the good work that you are all doing, not just around the IDGs, but generally in the world. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Shall we take a break
Yes.
of 6 minutes and return at the 1/2 past the local hour? Yep.
Yeah.
See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you. That was nice music. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone.
So, Rafaela, I suggest we take a minute to digest a bit of Thomas' message. What do you think about that?
I also would like to invite Hannah, because we couldn't hear you, Hannah, share about the breakout room at the beginning, the check-in. If it's still live for you, if you want to share.
Yeah, thank you. I actually think it fits now even better, actually. So, because something that kind of bothers me or makes me worried is that I've also in the chat or also in the pre-session work in the forum somehow, a lot of people wrote that you need inner change for outer change, and or also that inner change and outer change has to go hand in hand. But I just want to, I don't know, point out or share an idea, a question that if you have extremely difficult outer situations, then it's very, very hard to do inner work. And I think it's also very difficult to advocate for inner development to a community that's maybe facing a lot of financial pressure, health problems, is very marginalized. I don't know. And that's something I'm a little bit worried about because I think some parts of the whole discussion are very academic and also from a kind of privileged point of view, actually. And that's something that, I'm really worried about because I think we also need some changes in the outer system to make inner development possible. Because we know from psychology, from social science, that if people are under a lot of pressure, under existential dread or fear, or I don't know, all the things that might happen in this modern world, they cannot really think freely. Like their mind is very, very focused on surviving, and they do not even have the capacities to do the inner development. So I think it's very, very important that we also create outer systems that are making inner development possible. And that's just something I really want to, what is the right word, emphasize, to not think like, okay, if we do the inner work, then the outer change will come. Because I also think we have to make it possible for a bigger group of people to do inner work and to have circumstances that make it possible to have a mind that is free enough to even do these things and build an environment that is safe enough to even have capacities for all of this. And that's just something we also talked about in our group, but I think maybe it had to happen like this because I think now it fits even better after the input from Thomas. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, it resonates a lot to me. I see that when the IDGs first started, the theory of change was that if we somehow promote inner development among leaders, and especially business leaders, that would influence the system and perhaps create conditions for other people to access inner development as well, because in the corporate worlds, they have a lot of power to influence the system. But of course, with also policy making and influencing government institutions and so on. Because I see what you mean, that I mean even if you are thinking about poverty, those who are just fighting to put food on their tables, they don't have time to sit and meditate or to access tools that we, for example, access, right, through the IDG community. So, but I really feel that it needs to be more accessible, and that's also why somehow the IDG is trying to influence policy making so that governments can make it available somehow and make it a priority. Roland.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's a framework of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, unless, the needs right below, you can meet. But I would like us to be a little bit careful about being rigid about that analysis, because there are many societies that don't necessarily have, and I'm not talking about people who are starving or, hungry every day, but, many societies who have this rich spiritual, traditions, inner personal connection to their spirit, to a higher being, and they don't necessarily have, met this, Maslow hierarchy of needs, or necessarily be at the same level, economic level, as other, more societies with more developed economies. So I think that, we're cutting ourselves off by being a little bit too rigid, that, this needs to be met in order for this to happen. Because and we disconnect, I think, from that, very rich tradition of, internal inner development that is so rich, especially in non-Western societies. So just wanted to make that point or bring that up.
Thank you, Roland.
I can see that both of your points are important perspectives. It's not that one is more true than the other. So I think that's part of the complexity we need to hold, right? And thank you for sharing and putting that out to Hannah. A lot of appreciation also in the chat for that it's not accessible to everybody. So, all right. So we think there's a lot to digest from this presentation of Tomas, and we thought a better way to do that, instead of this larger group, where there's probably a lot of thoughts to be shared, is to do it in smaller groups, and also to connect with someone new who you might have not met so far. But so we've created some random breakouts in trios, most of the groups, some of you are 4. And I guess our question to you there is just to share what stands out for you from Tomas' presentation. What are some important takeaways, and what are what is your perspective that you want to share with the others in the room? And we've set the clock to 12 minutes for that. Is it clear enough for you all? Thumbs up if you're joining in. Yeah. All right. So let's open the rooms there.
Welcome back. So we are curious, what came up? What are the insights or the questions? What is live for you after hearing Tomas and the discussion here? Elizabeth?
I do have a curiosity. There's this one story. I might get it wrong. If anybody knows the story better, please help me. But it's the story of William Wilberforce, who was very focused on stopping the slave trade. He was in England, and he was trying to do it through, imploring upon the goodness of the human heart. And he was failing and getting sicker and sicker and sicker, because he was trying to just say, your inner life matters, and you're going to do the right thing. There was this older parliamentarian who took him under his wing and essentially tricked the entire parliament by sending them to a cricket match, while there was this tiny little tax that was put on the bottom of a bill that basically was going to make it very financially not acceptable to use the ships for the slave trade, and essentially shut down the slave trade. And so I think when I try to present and so that's the story. When I try to present, and it changed my world when I saw that, because I have this idea like you're not supposed to lie, you're not supposed to trick people, you're not supposed to be like that, but something really good happened from it. And so when I try to present the inner development goals, oftentimes people look at you like, oh, you're being so precious. It's all so precious, Oh, that's all very gooey, ooey, ooey, right? But so what I want to know is, where does trickery, just sheer trickery, like what that parliamentarian did, fall into inner development goals and accomplishing leverage?
Have an answer. Please.
Maybe, are you suggesting it as a new skill, maybe?
Well, honestly, I went back to the guide and I said, now, it should be in there. And then I think, well, maybe it's co-creation. And maybe it's, communication skills. But then my little ethics person comes out and says, ooh, you should. So, I don't know the answer. But I do know that I do know William Wilberforce was not effective. And he got sicker and sicker and sicker. And I think myself, I've trying to come from the heart, sometimes don't do well, in systems that are function differently. So I'm coming to terms, if I'm going to help a system change, I might have to know how to act like that seasoned parliamentarian and not get so precious with myself about what's it's hard to even say it. I really get hives. But I struggle with that. That's my inner truth, and that's where my growing edge is. Yeah, thank you.
But maybe one thing that comes to my mind, I'm not really sure if I got it the right way, but one thing that comes to my mind is that somehow we need to touch on what concerns the other, right? So not from our own motivation, perhaps, to do good, to contribute to sustainability, but I hear some people, like in the corporate world, for example, saying, okay, if you don't change how you do business, your business won't survive because climate change will influence what you produce. So, it needs to change, and perhaps the motivation of the other is profit. So you need to show how the things are working nowadays are influencing profit in the near future, but somehow understand and Otto Scharmer says that, recommends that on empathy walks, or Lalou also says, you need to ask them what is concerning them about the world today. What are the issues they are facing in their work environment, in their families, and from there, listen, and come up with what you believe, perhaps.
Thank you. I will add one little thing, and I'm going to reflect on that because thank you. And in that one story, the seasoned guy did focus on what they were interested in, which was cricket. And that's what helped the thing move through. I think that's also a skill, the perspective, and not have to be it my way, but what is this other entity interested in, and allowing yourself to utilize that and leverage that for some good. Yeah. Thank you.
And also, Joanna Macy, she recommends a lot connecting with the future generations. So when you bring it to a personal level, for example, think of the youngest person in your life. If you have a child, a grandchild, or a nephew, niece, and what they will face in 30 years. And then after connecting with this reality that feels very personal to you, then think of what do you want to do now to change that. I will share also on Sutra some nice videos that you can potentially use for that, connecting with futures thinking. And Alice?
Yeah, hi. I'm super interested, Elizabeth, in that example, because I sort of think that this, it obviously doesn't resonate well with you to lie. But I don't know the details of the case, but where my mind jumped to is they've obviously still got to agree to something, like these parliamentarians, and it's kind of their fault if they didn't read the fine print. So I'm wondering if it was less trickery and lying and more that he just got creative. So maybe that's reframing it in your mind. It's like, how do we get more creative about these solutions? Yeah. And like, so really maybe the genius was linking it to the cricket, slipping it in, perhaps relying on people not reading the fine print, where, you know, like that's getting creative, and it was obviously a really effective outcome. So maybe that's a better way of thinking of it as an ethicist, and I'm an ethicist. So I guess I share your concern about trickery and sort of lying, which doesn't sit well with me, but like getting creative, relying on people's laziness, well, it's different.
Right. Amazing. Thank you for sharing the perspectives and your thoughts after this. And I'm sure there are other things after your group work or the dialogues in the breakout session. But it's time for us now to oh, I see, Barty, you're sharing one of my favorite sources there also with Adam Kahane. Great. And it's about trickery, actually, is it, Barty? Yeah. All right. Anyway, we can look into that afterwards. Anyway, so we just want to share for the next session. There is also some pre-work again to be done. Some of it is things that you can do by yourself, and some of you is again meet together in your learning groups. And so, can you see my screen now? And some of you mentioned that it's hard to hear what I'm saying, but can you hear me? Good. Yeah, great. Thank you. All right. So the first thing is I think we need to want to have a prototyping mindset in this during this program. So trying out different ways of saying things. So we invite you to bring in IDGs into a real conversation, just any conversation with friends, colleagues, whatever, and then invite somebody, and then have a short conversation with them where you introduce the IDGs, you talk about the importance of inner development for outer change, and then talk with the person and see how did that work out? How did that way of talking work out? So you share that with each other. So that's a quick prototyping session. And then during, as we said before, I think we mentioned it, during this whole program, we invite you to also, or encourage you to have this prototype of a presentation where you can share up to 10 slides or so, where you present the IDGs and you find your way of talking about them, which is your personal way, but also connects to our common story. And again, this does not have to be finished now, but it's a continued work. But we invite you to encourage you to start adding on to it based on what you learned from this session and maybe the session where you talk to a friend. And then again, there's a vast amount of tools that you've already shared on tools and exercises on Sutra. This is great. It's amazing. And this is a great resource. And I just want to emphasize that the objective of this training is to be able to be an ambassador and an advocate for inner development for outer change. This is not really a tools training in itself, but sharing tools like this is a great way for all of us to access into this our common wisdom or experience in this crowd. And the next time we have Christine Baumsler with us, and to me, we have a lot of amazing presenters, but to me, she's really framed the connection between the sustainable challenges that we're facing and how they're connected to inner development. Basically, her message is: we know what the problems are, we have the solutions, but we're not doing anything about it. So therefore, it's up to us to change. So she'll talk a bit more about that. And she's a professor in sustainability. And then also book a meeting in the learning group. So that's until next time, which is May 25th. So and everything is on Sutra, as you can see. And yeah, that's that. Sorry, I was sharing the wrong window. You're seeing the calendar, right? I just realized it when I looked at my screen. Everything is here on pre-work session 3. So that's where you have all the instructions. Sorry. All right. So with that, it's time for us to conclude. Do you want to check out with a last word in the chat, and maybe we do a chatterfall as we've done first. What are you leaving with? See if you can write a word in the chat and wait to push enter until I count down. And then, Raphael, is there anything else we need to add before we end?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah.
We can stay maybe a few more minutes after we end for those who have any questions or.
Yeah. All right. So let's just push enter for those who've already started, and let's continue with that. So we have curiosity, challenge, hope and gratefulness, nurtured, more resources and more questions, brainfulness. Again, yes, these are fairly brainy sessions. We would like to maybe shift that going forward. Renewed motivation, appreciation, and so forth. So let's conclude. We'll hang out for a few minutes for an afterglow, but let's say goodbye in our own language, as we always end. I really enjoy this part. So just turn on your microphones and say goodbye in your own language.
Goodbye.
Take care, everybody.
Tschüss.
Tschüss.
Yes.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.